So just for the record, apologize. I was down the allotment early, so I'm
Hello.
I'm not at my camera best, but I'm not worried about such things. Anywho, what can I do for yourself?
Yeah, it's a weird thing. Sorry, lots of windows here. So, yeah, here's the funny thing. When you did the hand interaction yesterday,
Yeah.
fuck's sake, someone's doing work. One second. Other people, always the most annoying. Right, so looking at the hand, it was okay.
Yep.
Visually, it was okay.
And fun enough, I was just about to write some note to say, really, just another thank you to Andrew, because what was lovely about it was, in a sense, that this is the thing I'm learning to appreciate about technology, it actually worked. I mean, in the sense that what I saw was sort of what I expected. Apart from this lovely thing that we discovered that the fingers work when you do the proprioception thing, that they actually the fingers and thing. But that's all the implementation stuff. But yeah, it broadly at work this idea that you had a place to anchor things. Yeah,
Because there's a huge repercussion that I just realized while trying to write now. The whole laser pointer thing is not always necessary. That's what it taught me. So you're screaming and shouting yesterday, in the good sense, being funny, about not just doing this and that, but having more Lego interactions. We can actually do that with our hands.
yeah, because I think what I was reflecting after the call, and I thought, oh dear, we've had another sort of argument that I didn't really intend, which was and wasn't. But what was on what were two things were at the back of my mind. One was that Andrew was very subtly saying, "Well, this is fine. I can put whatever label you like on whatever digit, but what does it do?"
Yeah, but
Um, and plus the fact that just this what it made me realize was okay. So um, the thing that you're talking about really is getting back to the gesture. So there's a difference between how we trigger the gestures, or how we, or how we, or how the environment knows that we're going to do something. Because we might want a gesture. I think what's really interesting was that the thought that stayed with me about when you kind of do that spreadsheet, we're thinking about find, and that made me think, oh yeah, I wonder what find means in different things. So, in other words, there's a really interesting subtlety that I've stored away is that sometimes you want to do something, but you need to know the context, and that was what I found really interesting in Andrew's observation. Is said, well, sorry, forgive me. It might have been yourself. I forget. But say, well, no. If I say first, I'm going to show or hide something, and then say what I'm going to show or hide, it's a very subtle bouleversement of the two things. But it might actually be more flexible, going to the point you're hinting at, which is that if I want to be expressive and do stuff, um, so in
no,
other
no,
words,
but Mark,
yeah,
there's a very specific point. The very
okay.
specific point is this. We have been brought up in this environment to believe that focal distance is about a meter, meter and a half in front of us. And that's like a hard truth, which is why we need the laser pointer so much. And I think there is some truth to that. But what I realized now is that when we look at our hands in XR, it's not like it's blurry or we have to cross our eyes or anything. It's totally fine. So yeah, and that I think it's hugely significant because it says to me, we can do a Mark Anderson style, let's call it a cube, just for fun, in that we can interact with in 3 dimensions with our hands right in front of us, and we can see just fine. However, if there's a bit of text we want to read deeply, that may very well need to be pushed back a little bit. So we will find an optimal reading distance per user to read a hypercard block of text. Fine, no problems with that. But the solution is, you asked very provocatively yesterday, but how should we interact with it to do this untangling? Let's call it untangling, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And if we do that with only things at a distance, I mean, XR interactions are awful, much worse than a keyboard and a mouse at the moment, right?
Yes.
So that's why when you have a chance to put on the headset, and Emily's going to put it on now, I want you to look at your hand, just like you're on LSD, and just
Mhm.
decide, can I work at this distance for some of my work? And I think you will find the answer is yes. I just want to check.
Well, yes, but you raised another really interesting point. Sorry, I can't quite make this idea go away. Is that another thing? Another thing you've resurfaced is the point that I think Randall brought up, gosh, a year and a half ago or something, saying, well, in summarizing, we've been talking about things being blurry or something. So, well, yes, but an impact of the tech, such as it is at the moment, is you basically have to stand where the focus is, um, which is very close to what you're saying. And then follow on by saying, but wait a minute, the hand's in focus. So the point is, the thing that you need to look at can be in focus. It doesn't. We own the environment, so we can play perspective if you want. We can play eye focused tricks, so that the thing that may be in a sense not so close is actually in focus, because it knows, because we've somehow indicated that this needs to be in focus, and therefore the system knows that to be in focus it must be at an apparent distance of x, even if its imagined distance in the environment as we're interpreting it is there. So I think that's a really powerful thing. I hadn't really thought about that before, because um, maybe going off a tangent, but you've unlocked a really interesting idea here, which is um, if you accept sort of literal focal distance as a constraint, we can cheat in other ways. So I can make something that's 12 feet away think it's at a focal distance of a foot and a half by effectively playing with the relative distance. Um, and that might unlock an awful lot of things, because I think that the thing I really learned from the experiment I did with the NODA stuff 2 years back or something was, right, okay, I can't just go around building extensive visualizations with stuff all over the place, because I can't read the damn thing. So in other words, I might as well use abstract shapes, because at least I can recognize those at any distance. Whereas when I want the text, yeah. So one of the things, an interesting design element is that what that implies is that I, as the user, need a method to signal something that might be counterintuitive to me but needs to be known by the environment, that I now need to see this bit of text readably. And I might want to do it one of two ways. I might want to literally foreground it. I literally want it to be the sort of like the center of focus. Or I might want to say, I actually this needs to be readable. Now that might realistically mean that I can't read all of it, but that will be a fair trade-off. But what I'm really saying is I want to be able to see in my main, because we're talking about, like human eyes, we're still talking about, essentially you've got an amount of stuff out here, and it's entirely likely that in an immersive environment, we may move things of less immediate interest to one side, or a tool might do that for us. It doesn't matter which, but they're sort of what. So this thing is, but I might have these things in front of me. But but essentially, I might need to be able to see, I read this, and this at the same time, because I'm trying to do something comparative, and my wetware needs those things to be visible. I don't really care how it's done. So I don't need to know behind the curtain. I just need them to be readable to my physical eyes in that moment. And then probably when I do the next thing, I may actually, in a sense, implicitly want to dereference them, because this goes back to the sort of what I've termed in a very generic way, noise. In other words, stuff I can't read, I don't have to process, because I in a sense, it's unreadable text, so I'm not trying to read it. And so that's one of the interesting things that I was in my mind when we spoke yesterday about gestures. How do I signal in this grab bag? And I deliberately sort of was being a bit obtuse about saying I don't care about outlines. I'm basically saying I have an object that has all these interesting things inside it, and I need the bits inside them in the combination I want, when I want, And as I sit here, I have no idea how we do that. It's partly because, yeah,
No, I mean this goes back to all the way in the beginning, and that's what's nice with these conversations that we kind of keep track. The notion of if the system at least has RTF or rich text or HTML versions of the papers, not just PDFs, right? If they know what the headings are, then at least we can choose to have a view where you have heading content next to it, heading context, right? And have that in a nice curve in front of you. That is the beginning of it. And then we can choose to have images maybe above, so they're more easy to go big and small, right? These are some of the things we can do, and we can probably go a lot further than that.
hmm.
Now, hang on, I'm just going to pause the video for a second.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, so with
Okay,
those
so I'll start
personal
again.
things
So
out of the
I
way,
had an
let's
interesting,
back. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, so I'll just rewind a bit to give the preamble. When we were talking, basically after we stopped recording yesterday, I had sort of some insight as to what was driving my mind. So I was thinking, okay, well, I'm looking at a document, I'm trying to understand where it sits in relation to things, or I might otherwise be asking just, well, what is it drawing from? And without being too literal about what we mean by a library, but if for instance, in the environment, I've chosen, it might be 10 things, it might be 10,000 things. Let's not get too hung up on that. But what the environment might be able to do is, say, take something like one of Adam's nice sort of linear presentations, time linear presentations. And for instance, just almost show you like a heat map of where this document is touching past work. I mean, a problem, and as sort of Peter's recent email, Peter Wasilko's recent emails brought up about, the way that we are shamefully bad about actually being accurate in our citations and sort of in terms of things like errata, because it sort of matters if you point to the wrong thing, is that, but if we assume for a moment those errors don't exist, being able to just see, so you might, in other words, you might see a corpus that you as the user at the time have decided is the relevant reference corpus for the thing that you're doing. And let's not define it more than that. But being able to see the thing I'm looking at, that's interesting. And it suddenly got very excited about sort of, the 1990s or something like that. Or you might, another subject, it might be, I don't know, early organic chemistry in the 1800s or something. That I think is really, really, really quite interesting, because it does something. Going back to this point about where does the excitement or the draw come from? Well, that's something I definitely would struggle to do with however many 2D screens I have in front of me. I could make all the constituent parts, but I couldn't do it as a whole. So one of the really interesting parts of the XR created immersive space, you might call it VR, I can't get too hung up on the terms, is that essentially I can have a sort of the thing that I'm doing or reading interactive with, and I can have what otherwise would be another window, maybe on another screen, but is actually sitting contingent in my visual space doesn't have a sort of frame window going around it. And they don't need to be necessarily be lines. It could be very subtle hints. I mean, a really interesting thing from Adam's some of the experiments he did was, I think, the realization that and this isn't, I don't think this runs counter actually to sort of Ted's notion of visibility, because the visibility comes from almost the way you indicate the other end of the link, because at scale lines become noise, as you've pointed out again. That was one of your sort of insights from your map view. And you have this really nice notion of so you roll over something to visualize the links, because if they're all on all the time, it's like a cat's cradle, and that causes that gets in the way of our understanding. But be able, it's the kind of thing that if you look at this thing and suddenly that panel over there, all the lights come on in a certain sector, I think is really quite an interesting way, because you don't have to react to it. It's again, it takes me back to, gosh, when I was sort of watchkeeping, and you had this really complicated informational space, but you had all these little tailbacks around you. And even working without moonlight, in total darkness, with tiny amounts of light, but just seeing little things blink on and off, gave you an incredibly rich informational environment. Yeah.
Yes. So I feel that you're now advocating for the map. What I mean by that, no, no, I'm being
Yeah.
critical.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
No, I see what you mean. Yep.
I can't help myself. Um, First of all, I've texted Adam asking if you and him and me should do this as our own thing. We can mention it in ACM and all of that, but it wouldn't be a Sloan thing for many reasons. But yes, so um, I talked to Phil Gooch the other day. We were sitting at
Yes.
the Barbican, oddest place, and he talked about how the hunter's brain, and it seems like the male hunter's brain is different. We have much more sensitivity to peripheral vision. So I haven't followed up, but it's an interesting thing. And also in
Hmm.
computer games, I really want movement represented as blurry things on the side to represent I should turn. So your naval experience speaks to that very much. Now, what I think we should do is focus on two different things that overlap. This is something I know I'm preaching to the choir. This is for clarity, not to tell you something
Hmm.
new. One of them is we have the list of papers in front of us. That has to be one of them, as we're already doing.
Hmm.
And then we need to do the elements in the room because what you're saying now is taking it another notch. I talked about author names, and I know the limitations of that. I agreed with you and Dina yesterday. By the way, Claude's summary of that was flawless. I just think it's an easy data point that we have. So what I can imagine is and I'm so glad you used the provocative notion of being in a Navy ship at night, because imagine if you, in the ACM community, first of all, you and me both strongly agreed metadata is crucial. So all the authors who have ORCID IDs will have them in this environment. So you know Mark Bernstein is Mark Bernstein always, even if it's something Mark M. Bernstein or whatever. That problem is, because it's a closed community, solved, right?
And actually, a nightmare I'm living through at the moment is they didn't, ACM neglected to tell anyone, but certainly for TAPS since 2022, it's actually been a requirement. So you can't actually submit a paper unless you have an ORCID, which is fine if you're an academic, but it's a bit of a bummer for the practitioners and things who might. Yeah, because I remember talking
Yeah,
to
yeah.
Adam.
But anyway, yeah,
Anyway, go on.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
right. So I can imagine that you have set up your, okay, look, cyberspace, the word cyberspace itself, cyber means
Mhm.
helmsman, steersman. So this marine notion is just beautiful, right? So on your ship in XR, you have set up over there a cluster of Mark Bernstein and similar people. Over
Mhm.
there, you have this and that, right? So as you go through this list, you don't necessarily get the boring, dry lines that I have in author, which is all I can afford at the moment. You can have different ways that these highlight, right? And this is where I think spatial memory, memory palaces, different levels of perception, foveal focus versus the size you're talking about, can really start to come into their own. And if we do authors as one and the other obvious things, the citation trees that you and Adam have been working on, absolutely fantastic. Now, what I think the really interesting challenge will be, because I think we are getting close with Andrew to actually building what I just talked about, because the quote unquote skins or looks on this will be crucial. It's great that we have a basic gray version, but we should also try something much more dramatic because it fits what you said, not for theater. The other side of it is much harder. You open up one document to decompose it. So then we get to exactly the age-old question: who should choose the presentation? You or the author? Probably both, right? So if we, for the sake of
Yes, I think
simplicity,
the thing. Sorry to interrupt, but you're right. I mean, this is something I was getting at in the paper you've seen. Is that I mean, lit crit sort of goes way over my head, but I'm beginning to see the point of the whole thing of the death of the author. Bartos is that the author's presentation is not without value, but it may not speak to the task you're trying to do at hand, and you're not. And by doing something different, I think this is where the lit crit gets a bit stuck. Is that you're not criticizing the author. You're not saying you wrote a shit narrative. You're just saying that's fine. I still need that, but I need to do this other thing. And you provided
no,
me all this
absolutely.
interesting stuff.
We're
So I think it's being us being able to sort of. Well, no, I think it's important that we I wasn't saying that because I thought you disagreed, but what I'm reflecting on is we need to elevate that in our discourse, in our record, as it were, going forward. Because I think a lot of people, I would expect a lot of people to not get that because they haven't had as much exposure to this, and therefore they will see lots of things as not being problems because they haven't encountered them.
No, absolutely. And yeah, we are literally and figuratively on the same page on this one. So what I'm saying is that in the same way that the dream of visual meta is, of course, in the traditional environment to present things as the author wants, but to allow the reader to completely change everything, fonts, styles, everything. We're talking about the next bigger step here. We're talking about the author ideally being able to present even a 3D structure, right? Where you have this there and that there, and that can be very useful, but the metadata has to be there to support you, the reader, being able to say, no, I want to see it with my workspace layout.
I mean, yeah, I'm conscious. I'm conscious in before. Well, I'll preamble to say what I'm about to say by saying that our imagined and our working styles will be different for all sorts of reasons, and not just to do with our degree of physical performance and our eyes and stuff, but just because actually how we how we think about things, how we imagine things. But for me, the sort of decomposition is I don't see it so much in terms of I don't imagine it in my mind's eye so much as being some sort of grid or layout. It's more that here's the thing I'm looking at. I want the things that are contingent upon it to be close at hand.
Yes.
So as I'm reading this bit, it's not that I want a list of images, but I, for instance, might know that okay, so I'll take a sort of structure thing. So I've got a paper with 3 research questions. I just want to look at RQ2 and I want the things that relate to RQ2 to be there. So I want all the bits of the document that where the metadata says this is RQ2. I want all the figures, tables, formulae, whatever, and I want them sort of visible. And at this point, I don't know whether they're readable focus or just that I know they're there. And I want some way to understand how and where they're linked. And that again, that I might not want that linkage to be visible all the time because it's a sensory input. That's what I'm imagining. This is this decomposition that I'm thinking about. It's really hard because no one's done this, and I've taken on board your sort of challenge from yesterday. I've deliberately been looking at HT22 simply because we have HTML and PDF for both, and that's a pragmatic limitation in that whilst we may say that we have all the metadata available, for us to sort of begin to explore, we've either got to go and make it, or we should pick stuff that has the best set. So although it limits me in the papers I can choose, I'm going to try and find sort of 3 papers from that. And the sort of axes I'm looking at is does this paper have some visuals in it? I think the all text papers are going to be a harder nut to crack, and I don't think it's the place to start. But where there are bits to it, so okay, right, this goes with this goes with this, and I can sort of mark it up and say, okay, so what does that look? Now let's pull that apart, and we can use the HTML will be more tractable for us in the immediate term. And that's not I'm less worried about the tech. It's just the fact that I can get at the damn stuff and do it, and I don't have to do it all by hand, is my motivation there. So it's not a tech issue, or a sort of format issue. But and because because it links to some of the stuff I'm doing for the PSDI project, I'm sort of thinking about, yes, I want to pick something that backs onto a data set, because couldn't that graph be dynamic? And it might be, for sake of argument. Here's the provocation. It might be. I'm reading this.
Yeah, absolutely.
That actually, I now realize I don't even want to be looking at the paper at this point. I actually wanted to look at the data table that's underlying it.
Yeah.
And we could XR allows us to do this, or it offers the promise of it. And I'm sort of grown up enough to realize it can't do it now today, but it can believably do it if we decide to build those things out. And that's important in terms of what is it worth building and what is it, because you have to have some more, you can't build everything. And where I think it's interesting is, again, this loops back to your point about the engagement thing. and I've been thinking a lot about this, and I just sort of know that it's the difficulty that, well, hell, you can go to a comedy club, but you still can't make people laugh, even if you're a bloody good comedian, because not everyone likes the same thing. So you can't confect past a certain level. The excitement, I think where the excitement might come, especially for a researcher, be they academic or in the wider world, is being able to draw or see in a rather broad sense connections that they could only hitherto do in their mind. So, well, one of the things I think you learn to do as an academic is you learn to draw pictures that would just be too bloody complicated to make. Because I think what I've seen from interacting with a lot of computer visualizations is that you get there and you think all that work, and I'm still, only sort of 90% towards the thing that's in here. And that's fine. And I don't think one should see that as a judgment. I see it as a lesson to say, okay, be careful what you wish for. Where I think XR can help with this is us to be able to have all these things. And one of the things I've realized is that I don't think necessarily, I say we because I don't know, I don't have a sense as to who that person or persons are that captures this, but there is, I'm very conscious, for instance, if I'm talking to someone like Fabienne or Brandel, I don't have their understanding of, in a sense, what's a window within an environment. I just see stuff because I don't have that technical level. And so when I'm talking about the XR space, I was going to say I don't care. No, that's a very bad. No, that's too emotive. But I'm not. I have no investment in how that is created. I imagine essentially because it's a constructed space, I see what I need to see. Now, that section over there, half left from me, might, unbeknownst to me, be essentially a window. It might be a constructive visualization of a very complex data set with whilst offering me some dynamic affordances. So from a program perspective, that might be a window. I don't care. It's just something I'm seeing in the environment. Sorry, I've used that word "don't care" again, and that's bad because that's not the point. It's not, because I think it trivializes the design. The requirements we're laying on the designers to do this. They have to build this. But what I take away from thinking on this is that we also need to start thinking beyond windows. So we've had 500 years of print, we've had 30 years of windows. Call them what you like, frames, sections. The thing is that the holodeck, the magical holodeck aspect of XR is that you can have all those things together, and behind the curtain, some things may be quite literally, this environment viewed through a window. I'm thinking of, Leon, some of his experiments. This again, I think is relevant. So, one part of your immersive environment might effectively be literally like a physical window frame that just views through into something else. To the user, that's an implementation issue, non-trivial, but from the experiential end, it's not important. Probably the main part is that you don't see a frame around it, because otherwise that destroys the magic. So the ability, for instance, that with the example we talked about earlier, where you're looking at a document, and you say, "Oh, that's interesting." You're sort of, the question you're asking, okay, so boatload of references. Where do they occur, right? And what do they link to this corpus that, as I said, I have decided is contingently interesting in this concept. So not necessarily everything that's referenced in the paper, but it's going to be, there's a sense of, okay, this subject arguably sits in this wider subject. Do I see a linkage? Because if there's no connection, you start asking, so wait a minute, what am I missing? And this really came home to me, funnily enough, through sweating the hypertext data set, when it was painfully apparent that long after social media had become part of the conference, They didn't cite even the stuff, the social media papers in the conference, which my private cynicism, I know I won't say it here because it's being recorded, but anyway, it doesn't matter. But the point is, it gives you it raises the question, what's going on here? And not in a bad way, because if I think it's, you know, in a as a well-intentioned academic, the question is as much of your own lack of understanding as it is any failure on the part of somebody else. You look in and say, well, wait a minute, I thought I understood this, but what I thought I understood is not represented in the way that in its sort of wider context, in the way that I would expect it to be. What am I missing? It might be a lack in the thing you're looking at. It might be a lack of your own understanding, and both of which are equally powerful, because certainly if it's your own lack, it might mean that, okay, I'm even going to stop doing this now and I'm going to solve that problem because I need to solve the other problem before I can come back here and understand why I had the thing in the question in the first place. Yes.
So what I would like you to do is take one or three or two or three, whatever papers, ACM papers that you think are of value. Put them in something like Photoshop or Keynote or whatever, kind of a screenshot of the front page, and then put on the sides the contextual stuff you think would be valuable for someone new looking at that paper. That could be a useful test, no?
Yeah. I'm at the moment. I mean, I've already started. I was looking at there. I mean, I'll say. I mean, I'm slightly conflicted. But one of the papers actually, I'm interested. I'm looking at, funny enough, actually, is the one I did with Dave on the hypertext data set. Why? Because it implicitly links to a public data set, and it has graphs and tables. What I'm now trying to do is to see if I can find at least a couple of the things I'm sort of trying to make a small set do is find a couple of documents that possibly have some cross linkage, i.e. the three that I've chosen, ones that don't, because that's another sort of thing you want to be looking at. But also I'm looking at things probably that have more. So yeah, I'm deliberately avoiding all text articles at the moment because I just think the metadata abstraction is more complicated. It's easier to take something that basically has a sort of a set of questions or something, because we can start to put metadata on it that a wider group of people will understand without having to ask, well, why have you separated this from that? In other words, when you decompose it, it shouldn't cause them to say, I don't understand, I don't know what I'm looking at anymore. To do that with something like, say, one of Mark Bernstein's essays would be marvelous, but they are challenging to read to start with, simply because of his erudition. Would be fascinating to do this with, but I think not a good place to start. So I think I can probably find three papers. I think where, as I've alluded to earlier, I think it lends itself. One way to explore this thing of linking the thing you're looking at with the wider context, which I think is what was in your mind when you mentioned map view, is that it's this issue of windows.
Yeah.
I'm not sure as a user, I'm too worried about whether I'm in a window or not. I'm in an environment. What I need to see is what I need to see. So I think experimenting with just being able to, and again, we can fudge the data, but being able to experiment with seeing some kind of, say, timeline library display, just merely to look at where does this touch the corpus that we think is contingent upon this. So again, I'll try and find papers that have a reasonable number of hypertext conference references, because again, the cheat is that we have enough data, so we can stand most of this up without having to do a boatload of work, because otherwise, every time that we make manifest our claim that, well, let's assume we have the real data, we're going to have to make it to do a trial. So I'm giving myself a couple of constraints there, but I think it might be three, it might be four papers. So my first cut is to find the papers, work out in my mind's eye the rationale that I can stand up to somebody, in other words, that I can propose to somebody else, which they shouldn't immediately shoot down, that this is why I've chosen them to work on this problem, and then I can start the labeling process.
Sounds good. And I'm going to stop the recording there. Thank you, Mark.